completely against, against which was against what was that neoclassical thinking. All right. So and we had started a bit with Wordsworth's idea of poetry. Now we'll be moving on to Biographia Literaria. So, dear learners, just pay attention. Let us see. Let us discuss about Biographia Literaria. Just give me 1 minute, students. Just 1 minute. Yeah, let us continue, learners. I'm back. We will discuss Biographia Literaria by Coleridge. Uh, Now we will see that how what is Coleridge saying here. What is his point of view in Biographia Literaria? Okay, so uh, he started. He initially spoke about a literary autobiography. Okay, he literally started about discussing related to literary autobiography.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, am
Ma'am,
I
can you
audible?
please tell us the unit?
Unit. Oh my God, I don't know which unit is this. I think one. You. This is biography and literature. Block. I think this is block 2 or block 3. Okay, and this is unit 3. Block most probably 2. Most probably block 2, unit 3. Just check. All right, and you just don't need to go around with your material. I'm teaching you. Just listen. If you need, if you find some certain things important, note it down. Then you can open your material. There is no point here to move around with the material and get out of your focus. Now, he initially started his discussion about literary autobiography in his Biographia Literaria, and then he ended up discussing about Kant. Okay, Kant and another artist called Schelling. Okay, and here he is talking about his perspective of criticism. Coleridge is talking about his perspective of criticism. Okay, and actually he's specifying Wordsworth poetry. Okay, he is specifying Wordsworthian poetries, and he is giving particularly Coleridge's perspective of criticism. Okay, he's giving his perspective of criticism related to Wordsworth's poetry. All right, and this is one of the major works. Biographia Literaria is one of the very big works, very eminent works, and it is a great contribution to the whole body of literary criticism and theory. Okay, so this is very important if you're reading criticism. And Here Coleridge gives a lot of idea, vast idea about aesthetics. He talks about the basics of philosophy here, and he talks about a great deal about practical application. All right, and this whole Biographia Literaria here, he gives a critical approach to different kinds of opinions. Uh, Different kinds of opinions that would help and that would inspire uh, many other future generation writers and critics as well. All right, and when he wrote and when this Biographia Literaria was published, people, they were a little pessimistic about Coleridge's criticism, because they said that he has copied the idea from the Germans. They say that particularly he has imitated in his criticism. He has imitated the ideas of many German critics like Kant, Schelling, and Schlegels. Okay, but if you read it deeply, you will find that most of the ideas were quite original, and that was, very much appropriate for the time, for the era. And finally, if you read that Biographia Literaria, you will find that this has been a production of a great mind and of a very sensible critic. Okay, so what he does here in Biographia Literaria, he talks about the whole aesthetics of poetry. He gives a vast definition of poetry. He gives his own idea about a poet. Okay, and then he moves on to giving a poetical criticism. Okay, he gives a criticism to the poetry. Okay, and mainly here you can see, if you read Biographia Literaria, he eminently propagates the theory of creative imagination. Please remember this. Overall, his idea, most eminent idea here is about the theory of creative imagination. And there are specifically some chapters which are very significant, which are very famous, particularly certain chapters like chapter 13 and 14. They are usually taught in colleges. The, the whole criticism is not taught, only chapter 13 and 14 is usually taught in colleges. Okay. Uh, Moving on. Now I'll tell you what is the major content here. In what is his idea about in Biographia Literaria? Okay, so as I told you, the basic idea, the chief idea, the significant idea is about the theory of imagination. Okay, so, what is this theory of imagination? Coleridge actually gives one, philosophical idea related to, to define nature and the self. Okay, he gives certain ideas about, and he defines about nature and self. Okay, so exactly he says nature. Actually, what is nature? He defines nature as the sum of all that is objective. Okay, the sum of all that is objective, which is passive and which is unconscious. That is nature. Nature is objective, passive, and unconscious. And what is self? Self means ourself. What are we? We are intelligent, okay, we are subjective, and we are conscious. Means just the contrary of nature. Nature is objective, passive, and unconscious. All right. And what is self? Self is intelligent, self is subjective, and self is conscious. We are conscious, we are intelligent. Okay, we are subjective means we have got multiple ideas and thoughts and points of views. Okay, so according to him, what is knowledge then? Knowledge, according to him, is the product of the it is the addition of the subject and the object. It is the both mixture of the subject and the object, that is knowledge. Okay, so and when you join this subject with the object, then what is created is the self. Self is created, okay, when there is a mixture of, when there is a blending of um uh, subject and object. When they are blended, then your identity is created. Okay. Okay, then he says, he goes on to say that what happens when this self, okay, when this self, when creates subject and object को मिला के तो self बन गया. Okay, that which is subjective, that which is objective. When you have, when you get an idea of both, when you take in, when you absorb the both idea of subjectivity and objectivity, then your self is created according to him. Okay, so actually this self, or what you may call the spirit also, uh, you know uh, you can see, with yourself you can see, you can imagine certain things which are either dead, okay, or which are either not dead. You can imagine certain things. Okay, this idea of self gives you the idea of creative imagination. So Coleridge theory of creative imagination is actually based on this perception of the self. Okay, self, how is self created? By both subject and object. Okay, what is subject and object? Let us go back a little bit. Object means nature is objective. Okay, nature is passive, means nature is never active, it is not actively doing anything. So nature is passive, nature is unconscious, it has no consciousness. Okay, and what is self? Self is the intelligent of a person, the the vitality of a person. So according to him, self is subjective, okay, and conscious. So all the knowledge, they make up both the subject and the object. Both means all knowledge comprises of both nature and the self. Okay, so this nature and self means this object and subject, when they join together, then the the identity of a person is created. Okay, and this identity is very self-conscious. All right, this kind of identity is very real of a person. Okay, and how your this identity is created by both by your subject and objective blending. Okay, and this experience uh, is very broad because you are a blending of your identity is a blend of both subjective and objective ideas. So this self that is created, okay, or the spirit that is created in a human being, it is it is the product of all creative imagination. It can do any sort of creative imagination. Okay, so Coleridge here, his view of imagination uh, is, people say of that time, those who had read those German writers also, Schelling and Kant, they said that no, this is what exactly they have said. This is what Coleridge is saying. Okay, like Coleridge, they are also understanding, they also believe in the interdependence of subject and object. Okay, so that is till this point, people say that Coleridge has completely taken down the German theories. Okay, but if the text is read and if the text is completely understood, then it is said that no, it has got certain originality, it has got certain fresh perception of romanticism. That is what is believed about Coleridge. So Coleridge is building his theory of creative imagination on the basic difference between fancy and imagination. Okay, please understand. He is building his idea of creative imagination, okay, by uh, basing on the theory of fancy and imagination. So he first in his Biographia Literaria, if you go to chapter 4, he gives a very clear distinction about these aspects of fancy and imagination. All right. Whatever he says, I'm quoting for you. In chapter 4 of Biographia Literaria, he says that repeated meditations led me first to suspect and a more intimate analysis of human faculties, their appropriate marks, functions, and effects matured on conjecture into full conviction. That fancy and imagination were two distinct and widely different faculties. So he says that fancy is one type of human faculty, another imagination is another type. So both are at the two ends. Instead of being, according to the general belief, either two names with one meaning or at furthest the lower and higher degree of one and the same power. So he's talking about these two faculties, fancy and imagination. So he says that both are either can be, you can replace fancy with imagination, or one is little lower in its uh, meaning than the other. So, Coleridge uses the term fancy. Actually, why he uses fancy? Because in that period, in that 18th century, point of imagination, it was a mechanical, era. Okay, it was that era was determined by certain laws, which means that during those phase, industrial revolution was taking place, industrialization was taking place. Okay, so by fancy, actually, he's talking about that that mechanical era which was beginning. Okay, and there certain laws, certain very rigid laws were coming up. Okay, so thinking of those, he gives the word fancy. Imagination, on the other hand, it actually transforms the material, okay, that it deals with, but he says that it just reproduces, imagination reproduces the fact. Okay, and fancy means your imagination, which was getting very mechanical, okay, which was getting very redundant, just like the mechanical era. uh, uh, the period was approaching towards very things which were very mechanical. Okay, So fancy, according to Coleridge, it has no role to play, but it has certain definite things, definite aspects. So according to him, fancy must receive all his materials ready-made from the law of association. So fancy, according to him, which he criticizes actually, was all ready-made. Okay, laws were coming up, and laws were giving all kind of ready-made, fancies. So here, so here he says that according to Coleridge, during those phase, fancy had a little role in the production of poetry. Okay, but imagination, he says, imagination gives us the scope for creativity, and it gives us scope and way to write great poems. So according to him, primary imagination is very elemental. Okay, about basic human perspectives, and that kind of perspective it has, that helps us to identify, that helps us to discriminate, that helps us to synthesize, and it helps us to come out with proper order. So imagination for him is superior. All right. Whatever basic perception we have is related to imagination. Okay. So, according to him, artistic imagination, now he comes to artistic imagination. According to him, artistic imagination, he says that it actually exists. Okay. It coexists with the conscious mind. Okay. And it exists between the way of operation. Operation means what? How you are carrying out your poetic thoughts. Okay. So, it talks about how you are carrying out your imagination into your poetry. Okay, about the flow, it is about the flow of poetry that you finally, or art particularly, when you finally try to plan to jot it down in your work. Okay, so here artistic imagination, according to him, it is the coexistence, okay, in your conscious self, in different levels of your primary imagination. Okay. Now, Coleridge then moves on, as I told you when I was introducing this Coleridge's criticism in Biographia Literaria. First, he talks about poetry. Okay, and he gives a good and vast definition of poetry. Then he talks about how poet arises from his views of imagination. Okay, how arises from his views on imagination. So he first, this piece is very important for we people of literature. We get many clarifications also of certain statements, certain theories, of certain, what do you say, certain points in literature. We understand so many minute things, like for example, he first of all begins between giving us the difference between poetry and poem. Please mark this is important, you're going to write in your answers also. First, he gives a difference between poetry and poem. Okay, so for him, poetry, this term poetry is wider than poem. Okay, and it has got many symbolic, very what do you say, very different meaning also, the word poetry. Okay, and particularly Coleridge uses this word poetry to cover most of the forms of imaginative literature. Okay, most of the forms of imaginative literature is termed under poetry by Coleridge. Okay, many forms of imaginative literature, many forms of fine arts also. Okay, and whose primary function is to give pleasure through the medium of beauty. Okay, so that is poetry for him. I'm repeating this for you, learners. For him, poetry is, is a term which has got many different levels and layers of meanings. But according to him, he uses poetry to cover most of the forms of imaginative literature and fine arts. And his and the basic purpose of this poetry is to give us pleasure through the medium of beauty. Through beauty, you will see beauty in these poetries, and then it will give you a sense of pleasure. So that is what is the word poetry stands for. Okay. So in his Biographia Literaria, there is one essay called On the Principles of Genial Criticism. Okay, he gives a broader idea of poetry that I'll read out for you. He says, please understand this, all the fine arts are different species of poetry. Okay, all fine arts are different species of poetry. Means they are different varieties of poetry, they are the different layers of poetry. They admit, therefore, of a natural division into poetry of language, poetry of the ear or music, and poetry of the eye, which means it gives pleasure to our different sensory organs, to our ear, to our eye. Okay, which is again divided into plastic poetry of the eye, which is again divided into plastic poetry of statuary and a graphic poetry or painting. The common essence of all consists in the excitement of emotion for the immediate purpose of pleasure through the medium of poetry. Herein, contradistinguishing poetry from science, the immediate object and primary purpose of which is truth and possible utility. Unquote. So, this is what he's saying poetry is. So, he says, first of all, poetry gives pleasure to our ear and eye because it is a music. Okay, it is a music, so it gives us lot of pleasure. But he says that again there is a division. It gives us a graphical imagination, means we can picturize through reading the poetry. Okay, so in that way, actually, when you read the poetry and you start picturizing things in your mind's eye, then what you do, you get excited, your emotions are stirred if you read those poetry after your imagination. Okay, and the immediate result is the getting of pleasure. All right, through poetry, through the reading of poetry, through understanding the beauty of the medium of expression. Okay, so here he says that this is completely contrary from science. Okay, completely contrary from whatever is very objective. Okay, here you see truth to certain extent, and that truth you can put into possible utility. All right, this is how he defines poetry. Are you able to understand, learners? Am I being clear? Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so poetry, he says, that has got different layers, but purpose is what? To give pleasure, to stir our emotions, to to excite our different sensory organs like our ears and eyes, and it is very contrary to science. Okay, and what is the purpose of poetry according to him? To express truth and some possible utilities of those truth. That is what he said. Now, moving on, we will see. See, last class I was teaching you Wordsworth's preface to lyrical ballad that I had taught last class. Today we are seeing Coleridge and his idea of poetry through through Biographia Literaria. We will see, we'll try to compare both of them. Okay, which aspect of which criticism is more important and significant, hence we can make a note of these points. So if you see Wordsworth, last class I was discussing through preface to lyrical ballads. So here you see that he is giving very limited scope. Okay, just hold on. Getting a call. Okay, listen, learners. I just got a call from your Tapas sir. He gave one important information. You won't have your his class today and tomorrow. Okay, he's caught up with some work. So for these 2 days, you won't have class. He'll adjust these classes later. Okay, so you can log out after I finish my class. So I was asked to inform you by your teacher. Now let me continue. Yeah. So here, what I was saying that we saw that Wordsworth gives very limited scope in comparison to Coleridge as a critic. Okay, as a critic, you will find Wordsworth remains little limited. Why? Because in his preface to Lyrical Ballad, he mainly talks about the approach of the poet. Okay, he says that poetry is meant for simple, poetry is meant for all, pleasure is meant for all, hence, poetry is made for all, for everyone. So, one standard should be maintained by the poets so that even a common man can read poetry. So, unlike those neoclassical poets, high jargons, high reference from history, from classical age is not needed because they simply imitated from those classical writers, which could be read only by the highly educated people. Whereas, according to Wordsworth, even poetry should be written in such language that even common people can understand. Okay, and poetry is meant for everybody. So why common people are getting deprived of reading and enjoying and getting the pleasure of poetry? So mainly his point of view moves around that, whereas Coleridge is getting, as I told you, little broad in his critical approaches. So if you see Wordsworth, sorry, if you see Coleridge and in his Biographia Literaria, you will see that slowly he's building one system, one method. Okay, he is talking about larger philosophical context. Okay, and he clearly talks about criticism as a very important part of literary studies. Okay, so I.A. Richards also, another critic, I.A. Richards, he writes a book on Coleridge, Coleridge on Imagination. So in that book, I.A. Richard, he talks about how Coleridge gives his criticism that was very much required, okay, to understand the fundamental concepts of certain aspects of literary genre, especially poetry, as we were discussing. Okay, so I.A. Richards also told how Coleridge paved the way for the appreciation of great poetry. Okay, Coleridge taught us how to appreciate great poetry. Okay, in his criticism, in his Biographia Literaria, Coleridge highly praises Wordsworth's poetry. So he gives examples of Wordsworth's poetry. He gives a very clear critical appreciation kind of thing of Wordsworth's poetry. So through that, we understand how we are supposed to appreciate great poetry through the example of Coleridge that he gives in his Biographia Literaria by pointing out Wordsworth's works. Okay, so if you see Wordsworth and Coleridge as critics, then you will see Wordsworth is quite subjective. Okay, it's quite broad, but Coleridge gives ample evidence of both subjectivity and objectivity, which is required in a critic that we have already discussed. Okay, if you see Wordsworth's approach to poetry, you will find that there is an element of primitive thoughts. But if you find Coleridge's theory, you will find that how Coleridge is trying to accommodate larger concerns. Okay, not only one concern, but he gives larger dimensions of concerns, which is used in shaping of criticism in poetry. Okay, So Coleridge talks a lot about shape, about form, okay, of how using meters to be an integral part of the poetic process. Okay, so in that way you will see that Coleridge is the father of new critics, because he charts down, okay, technically how you are going to make a criticism out of poetry. Okay, so you can say that Coleridge is more accurate. Now we'll move on to Shelley's defense of poetry. Now Shelley's as the word suggests, defense of poetry, it was actually a reply to the attack made by his contemporary writer Thomas Love Peacock. Okay, so this was a defense to the literary attack that he had received from his contemporary writer Thomas Love Peacock. Okay, but no doubt that there is a larger context, there's a larger theory embedded in Shelley's defense of poetry. Okay, and he gives a broader concept with regard to uh, Plato's attack on poetry. Okay, how Plato initially I said no, Plato had said that poets should be banned, and although his perspective was different, but here Shelley actually is is trying to give a context, is trying to set a context on Plato's attack on poetry also. Okay, and he's talking about Sir Philip Sidney's apology. Okay, because in apology, in Sidney's work apology, Sidney actually apologizes. Um, he gives an apology to some 100 years later. He gives his apology, but he did have Plato in mind all the time. So he gave uh, apology to poetry actually Shelley had given, and this was also a further rereading of Sydney's apology, and he is talking about what Plato had given, and in a way Shelley is answering back to Thomas Love Peacock through defense of poetry. Okay, so in my initial classes I have told you that Plato had attacked poetry. He says that poetry is just an image of an image, okay, that mimetic, as I told you, and as something which actually weakens the reason, and self control gets weakened through poetry according to Plato. Okay, and Plato had said that poetry is so emotional, okay, that it lowers a man's you know uh, realistic capability is getting hampered because poetry has got lots of emotions. So emotion, people, men get carried away by emotion over reason. So these were the attacks of Plato. Plato also said that poet thinks that they have knowledge of all subjects. Okay, but that is false. Poets only pretend to show that they've got knowledge of all subjects, but that is not the actual case. And according to Plato, poetry has is in no way related to tradition. Okay, and neither it is a valid means of knowledge according to Plato. Okay, this was what Plato had said. What had Sydney said, for which Shelley is reacting? Sydney said that poet was a maker. Okay, and Sydney said that poet does not imitate, poet does not express. Okay, poet does not discuss thing which already exists. He invents new things. Okay, according to Sydney says that poet doesn't imitate anything. Plato said that poet imitates from the outer world, mimetic. Okay. Whereas Sydney is saying that no, poet does not imitate anything. Poet does not, write what is already existing, but poet creates, invents new things, according to Sydney. Okay. So Sydney says that the world which is created, which is invented by the poet, is a better world than the real world. Okay. poet creates an imaginary world, and that world is a real world than the better world than the real world. Okay, and then Sydney says that he actually justifies the poet's work, poet's profession, of his imagination to create better world. He says that imagination does not gives us any insight into reality, but an alternative reality. Okay, this is very rational about Sydney. He says poet gives us imagination. Okay, and this imagination has nothing to do with reality, rather it gives us an alternative reality. Okay, so to Sydney, poetry is superior as a moral teacher in both philosophy and history. So Sydney says that no, poetry is a moral teacher. Okay, because it does not deal with abstract things, but it deals with realistic philosophies. Okay, it gives certain concrete examples. Okay, so here examples are not always tied to facts, but they are beyond facts. Okay, they can, they can bring those thoughts from the history also, so they can excavate also things from history. So he says that poet does not only exceed philosopher in his ability to create, but he can move the reader. He can move the reader. He can stir the reader's thoughts and imaginations. Okay, so according to Sydney, poetry has got certain higher values. Okay, now in 1820, 1820, Shelley's close friend, and he's a very famous novelist also, Thomas Love Peacock. He was born in 1785 and he died in 1866. The Thomas Love Peacock wrote one essay. Okay, and the name of his essay is The Four Ages of Poetry. And this poetry, The Four Ages of Poetry, it appeared in a issue of a book called Literary Miscellany. Okay, so in this essay, Peacock talks about poetry. Okay, and he passes through four stages in poetry. Okay, four. He talks about the different ages comparable to four ages of man. Okay, so what are the four ages? First, he says the age of iron. Okay, in which everything is very crude and is very much wild. Okay, everything is quite savage. So this is the period of primitive and medieval folk ballads and romances. So he divides the evolution of poetry actually into four different parts. First is the age of iron, where everything was crude, everything was savage, everything was wild. Okay, and this was the age of primitive and medieval folk ballads and romances were written. Okay, so it was the period of infancy for for the life of poetry. Okay, so then came second comes the age of gold. Okay, according to Thomas Love Peacock's essay, The Four Ages of Poetry. Now, the second age is the age of gold. In this age, natural geniuses came into existence. Okay, this is the period when the epic and tragic forms of 5th century Athens and Renaissance Europe belonged. Okay, this was the youth. The third is the age of silver. Gold gone, then silver. See, stone gone, gold gone, now silver. The age of silver. Okay, in age of silver, there was a lot of growth of luxuries in poetic imagination. Okay, and certain rules came. Okay, that gave a proper form to these kinds of poetic imagination. And this period is the period of Virgil, the period of Lucretius, and Dryden and Pope. Okay, then the fourth age came, the age of bronze. The third was the middle age of a human being. First was infancy, Second was youth. This third, silver age, is middle age. Fourth is the age of bronze. Okay, and now here what happens? Poetry returns to one artificial status. Okay, now this kind of status is he calls it the second childhood of extreme old age. Means the declining classical period, which is the age of Wordsworth, Scott, Byron, and others. Okay, so this is how he divides the four stages. So here you can see he gives the romantics as the least, isn't it? He says that this is the second old age. Okay, where the classical age was declining. And what age was this? This is the age of Wordsworth, Byron, and others. Okay, so here Peacock is trying to say that as civilization advanced, poetry declined, according to him. Okay, and according to him, poetry declined and became a waste of time for intelligent and enlightened people. Okay, he said that instead of wasting their time, enlightened and intelligent people wasting their time in reading poetry, they would be better spent in the study of natural and social sciences. So when this romantic period came, Peacock was a little skeptical about the scope and style of the romantics. He said that instead of wasting time, intellectual people, instead of wasting time in poetry, now they should move on to natural and social sciences. Now, reading this essay, Shelley got excited and angry. Okay, so to his anger, he gives a name. He calls it sacred rage. Okay, sacred rage. So he wrote several letters to Peacock. Shelley here in his letter, he says that now you're doing hearsay. He's saying to Peacock that you're doing hearsay, and you are, you know, uh, you are discriminating the immortal song of poetry. So, in this reply, he wrote this brilliant criticism called A Defense of Poetry. This was published in 1821. Okay. So here he is defending the poetry through his reason. Okay, and he is giving his enlightened idea against primitivism, and he is giving his idea against superstition. So Shelley actually shoots back on him that why are you saying that gradually poetry is degrading, and why should people leave poetry and read social and natural sciences? Why? So he's giving a he is attacking, he's giving a counter attack. Okay, and he's saying that this whole fabric of human civilization is not the product of reason. There's no reason in this kind of civilization, but it is a product of imagination, according to Shelley. He says that it is not the reasoners who are the makers of history, but men of imaginations, and the poets are actually the makers of history, according to Shelley. Okay, and in order to establish this theory, Shelley needed to define poetry from his own fresh perspective. Okay, so he explains that the creative process and the evaluation of certain thoughts and feelings, they come from the influence from life of the individual and society. We are indeed influenced by individual and society, and from that comes poetry. So Shelley is defending, in he's retorting against Peacock's rationalistic, Peacock's cynical, okay, Peacock's humorous, and you can say that offensive description of the decay and final disappearance of poetry in the age of utility. That was the age of utility, romantic period, where, as I told you, industrialization was taking place. So Peacock was also getting very mechanical, to which Shelley gives a defense to the whole process of writing poetry. Okay. So how does Shelley define poetry? In his defense of poetry, he just like what you saw in Coleridge, here also he talks about the about about what poetry is according to his point of view, and according to how he is going to retaliate Peacock. In that way he defines poetry. Okay, so he starts by giving you the difference between reason, okay, and imagination. All right. So he says that reason actually is very quantitative, while imagination, it determines the value. Means imagination is qualitative, whereas reason is quantitative. So how will he define poetry from this angle? He says that poetry, in general sense, it is the expression of imagination. So Shelley says poetry is the expression of imagination. Okay, so Shelley says that imagination has got a very mysterious process. Okay, imagination is very mysterious, it is very, 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 peculiar, very, very different. Okay, imagination. So he says that using imagination, poet actually participates in the eternal process. Okay, in an eternal, he enters into a very eternal process. He enters into the infinite process. Okay, of image of life, which is expressed in the eternal truth. Eternal truth is life. Okay, eternal truth is life, and the poets, slowly moves into this image of life through the poetry. He slowly enters into the image, the replica of life, and he tries to put this image, this replica of life into poetic imagination, and that makes a poetry great. So this is, we are here to use the word poetry in a very wide and loose sense, and Shelley deliberately gives a very wide and loose sense of poetry. But why? Because he's saying that poetry has got is a universal aspect. Okay, and poetry signifies all creativity. Okay, so the poetical faculty, you know uh, is completely roused in different spheres of life. So according to Shelley, poets are not only the authors of language, they do not have the only authority of language, but also they are the institutors of laws, they are the organizers of civil society, they are the founders of religion. See how he is elevating the standard of poets. They are the founders of religions. They are the inventors of art of life. Okay. And in their respective spheres, in their areas, they reflect the ideal order of life. Okay. This, see how highly he praises the poets. So he says that if you see architecture, see how broad idea he gives. For him, poetry doesn't mean just to take pen and paper and write rhyming lines. He says architecture, painting, music, dance, sculpture, philosophy, and many other forms of civil life, they are all expressions of poetic faculty. Okay. So he says that all, that is contributed to the enrichment of human civilization, they are poets. Okay. And those who are particularly gifted with the poetical or creative instincts, they have neither made nor can ever make any contribution to human civilization. Okay, so he says that poetry is the expression of imagination in language. Unlike expression of imagination in language. And poetry, according to Shelley, is the most ideal and effective expression. It is the best way of, most effective way of expression of certain thoughts, ideas, or philosophies. Okay, just give me 1 minute. Just hold on. Oh, I'm so sorry. I had forgotten to unmute and I was continuing to talk. Anyway, let me get back what I was saying. um, Shelley actually dismisses the division between poetry and prose. And he says that writers, prose writers like Plato, like Bacon, they were prose writers, but they were writing poetry like, well, they were writing prose like poetry. Okay, they had poetic form in their prose also. Okay, so this use of language, according to Shelley, is characterized by harmonious, you know, reference of essential elements, which is important in poetry. So similarly, poets and their contact with that ideal order, okay, they are in contact with the beautiful aspects of life and philosophy. So they do not use language literally, but they use language metaphorically. Please understand this. He says that the poets, they have contact with ideal order. Okay, they have contact with whatever is beautiful in thought and philosophy and in idea. So they do not use language literally, they use language metaphorically. So that is the beauty of a poet. Okay, whether you are writing prose or poetry in a strict sense, if you have got that you know measured language, if you can use metaphor very smoothly, then that is actually a poetry according to Shelley. So according to him, metaphorical language, if it is used too much, it loses its freshness with the passage of time, and it is need of regular renewal. If you use similar kind of metaphor again and again and again, what happens? That newness is lost. So, time and again, according to Shelley, this kind of metaphorical use in poetry writing should be renewed from time to time so that it could be kept fresh. Okay. So, such metaphorical language here uh, should be, revived from time to time, according to Shelley. So, if new poets, they are to arise, they are to create certain fresh things, they have to time and again disorganize the language which will be dead after a certain period of time. Same language, same style, one cannot go on imitating ages after ages. Okay, so certain kind of renewal is also needed. Then only the poetry can remain fresh. So, poetry, according to Shelley, brings light and fire from the eternal regions of creativity. Okay, so it has got a lot of sense of calculation. Okay, it has got a deeper sense of understanding of you, not only calculation but understanding of human life or the life around us. So then only a great poetry could be produced. So this is what is the Shelley's idea in his defense of poetry. Now, dear learners, I have finished both these criticisms of Coleridge and Shelley, respectively. And you won't be having this next class of Tapas sir for today and tomorrow. So we will take leave today, and I will meet again tomorrow, and we'll continue with the next part of our literary criticism and theory. So for today, I try to explain to you the best, because here there are no stories, there are no thoughts. There was just simple criticism, and how poetry is defined. So I think I did my best. I tried to make you understand to the best of my ability, and we'll continue tomorrow. Thank you so much, dear learners,
Could you
for
please
your.
give us the important questions of these units?
How can I give you important? Because I'm not going to set questions. Listen,
Okay.
but see, there are certain common questions which are there. Give the significant idea of Shelley's defense of poetry, or you might get a question like this, that why is it defense of poetry? What is Shelley trying to defend? Okay, and who is he trying to defend? So this can be a question. All right, and then if you see Biographia Literaria. the basic idea contained in the essay that you can write. That question might come. Why is it important to read biography literature for the people of literature? And this kind of question may be there. Okay, but don't worry, there'll be a general question. There won't be any critical question here. Straight questions will be there because uh, these things essays are quite mechanical. So you won't get any difficult questions here. All right. So just read these materials very properly, very deeply. Okay, so that and what you do, you make categories. What Plato said, write down in your copies. What Plato had his idea, we started from there. What his disciple Aristotle said, then how he moved on to different centuries and what kind of critical revival came. Okay, how different genres got shaped and formed with the help of these criticisms. They are important, so you can make a note of this so that during your exams it will be easy for you to respond to those questions. Okay, I think I answered your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, will you be having the class every day?
Don't you have the timetable? I'll be having class till 17th. Are you bored? Who is this asking
No,
me?
ma'am, I'm not bored. I'm just inquiring about it that whether the class will be conducted every day or not.
They are conducted every day, but I think there's if you have the timetable, you can check. We have got off on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay,
Actually, ma'am,
and
I'm a student from Delhi.
okay, your name is Tejas. Okay, yes, then yeah, you will be having classes. My classes at least till 17th, and they'll be off on Saturdays and Sundays. Okay,
Okay, ma'am. Thank you very much.
okay. Now I take your leave. We shall meet tomorrow at the same time. Okay. Till then, goodbye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, everyone.